Some of you might be wondering what this painting is. Well, this is a painting from 1844, and this is from Horace Vernet, the American painter, and it's his depiction of the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah from the Old Testament of the Bible. This is Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. And this is his depiction of this Hebrew prophet, Jeremiah. And if you read the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah was born in the year 650 BC in the kingdom of Judea. And at that time, the kingdom of Judea was experiencing a lot of injustice, I guess you could say. At the time, the gap between the rich and poor in the kingdom of Judea was rising very significantly. And the rich people were becoming more and more ruthless. They were finding loopholes in the Hebrew law through which they could utilize poor people as slave laborers to build their great mansions. They also, according to the Hebrew law, they had provisions to care for widows and orphans, but those were being ignored, and widows and orphans were being left destitute and hungry. And at the same time, the rich were also engaging in human sacrifices, and they were burning infant babies, and they were engaging in all kinds of rituals and such. And Jeremiah was not from the priesthood. He was just an ordinary person, and he spoke up against the rich and powerful in the kingdom of Judea. And I want to point out something about that, because it's very, very easy to speak up against people who have no power. It's very, very easy to condemn people who have no power. And I hear that when you turn on CNN. You know, they'll sit there, some Hollywood celebrity. I'm so morally opposed to these people who vote for Donald Trump. These people in Texas and Alabama, they're bad people. I condemn them. I morally oppose them. It's just so wrong. And they sit there, and then the cameras go down, and they're like, all right, time to go party with P. Diddy. Time to get on Jeffrey Epstein's airplane. It's ridiculous. It's so easy to grandstand against people who have no power. But if you start calling out the rich, and you start calling the powerful, that's when the consequences begin. And Jeremiah did that. And in fact, one of the people who was the most opposed to Jeremiah was the priesthood. Why? Because he was calling out the priesthood. He was saying that the priesthood, they were complicit in the crimes of the rich. They were complicit. They were enabling the rich to get away with what they were doing. And so he called out the priesthood, and he built a movement. And all kinds of people in the kingdom of Judea started gathering outside the temples to listen to Jeremiah's preaching, to put on sackcloth. And the message was, we've got to change our ways. We've got to repent. If not, we're going to lose our country. And he said that if they could change, and if they could start caring for the widows and orphans, and if they could start having a society that was not tricking people into cheap labor, and if they could actually go back to their principles, they could save their country. He said, for if you thoroughly amend your ways and your doings, if you thoroughly execute judgment between a man and his neighbor, if you oppress not the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, and you shed not innocent blood in this place, and neither walk after other gods to your hurt, then I will cause you to dwell in this place, in this land that I gave your fathers forever and ever. That if you can turn things around, we can stay here. But if not, we're going to lose our country. And Jeremiah was building this movement of people in the kingdom of Judea, calling out the rich and powerful, and he got a great boost in social media terms. There was somebody who really liked what Jeremiah had to say, and that was the king, Josiah. The king Josiah was seeing that they had enemies and that there were other countries that could attack them, and that the way the rich were behaving and conducting themselves was tearing apart the social fabric they would need to resist a foreign invader. So King Josiah, who was himself from the rich and powerful class, decided he was going to boost Jeremiah. So he began promoting Jeremiah and encouraging people to listen to Jeremiah's speeches and promoting him. And Jeremiah was able to thrive and build this mass movement because he was trying to hold the country together. But then the king died. And after the king died, the new king who came in was somebody who was in with the rich and their human sacrifices and their parties and didn't want to hear what Jeremiah had to say. And so this new king did not protect Jeremiah from the priesthood. And the priesthood moved in to very ruthlessly begin to persecute Jeremiah. Jeremiah was publicly flogged, and he was placed into a pillory in front of the temple. And his family abandoned him and denounced him. And the Priests even forbid him from ever getting married because they wanted to just stick it to him, right? Imagine such an awful thing to do to somebody, to deny them the right to get married. And if you read the book of Jeremiah, chapter 20, he's crying out to God as he's in the pillory, as he's being humiliated, as he's being persecuted. He's crying out to God and saying, I wish I didn't have to say this. I wish I didn't have to speak the truth. And he says, I wish that I could just have held it in and not said these things that would get me in so much trouble. He says, then I said, I will not mention him nor speak any more his name. But his word was in mine heart as a burning fire shut up within my bones. And I was wearying of forbearing, and I could not stay. He couldn't hold in the truth. He knew what was going on. He knew how unjust it was, and he just couldn't hold back. He had to keep speaking despite all the persecution he was facing, despite losing his family, despite being put in a pillory, despite not being allowed to marry. He had to keep speaking up. And he's saying to God, why can't you just let me not say it? Why are you not letting me just hold back? That's Jeremiah. And what happened? Well, after Jeremiah was subjected to all this persecution and was isolated, was made into a social pariah, what happened? Well, Babylon invaded the kingdom of Judea. And the Israelites were subjected to 70 years of enslavement. And everybody knew that Jeremiah was right. And the whole reason we have the book of Jeremiah is because somebody, it's funny, this painting is inaccurate. Jeremiah was illiterate, so there's no way he could have been writing. This is an inaccurate painting. Back then, most people couldn't read or write. But Jeremiah, at that point, everyone realized he was right, and he fled to Egypt, and a scribe named Baruch transcribed his very poetic sermons so they can be preserved. And for the 70 years that the Israelites were held in captivity, they were all saying, Jeremiah was right. If only we had listened to Jeremiah. He was right. He was warning us that if we didn't turn around, we were going to be destroyed. We were going to lose our country. But we didn't listen. And look what happened. Now, it's kind of a sad story. But the reason it's important is because Jeremiah became kind of the archetype, right? Fast forward 600 years to when John the Baptist was going around, the voice crying out in the wilderness, wearing camel skin and eating locusts. Well, everybody knew he was modeling himself on Jeremiah. Jeremiah was the archetype that all the Hebrew scholars studied. And later, we've all heard that one of the famous deeds of Jesus Christ is driving the money changers out of the temple. Well, what did Jesus Christ say as he was driving the money changers out of the temple? He says, you have converted my Father's house into a den of thieves. Well, he was quoting Jeremiah. And to the people that were listening to him in the temple, the scribes, the Pharisees, that word ringed well because Jeremiah had said those very same words in that very same place. So Jesus was quoting Jeremiah. But what does this all have to do with America? Right? We're thousands of years in the future. Well, I think that has quite a lot to say about our time. But why do we have the Second Amendment in the United States? Why do we have the right to bear arms? We have the right to bear arms because our country was started by English religious dissenters. In England in 1649, there was a war between the Parliament and the King. And the King aligned himself with the Church of England. And so the Parliament, which represented the emerging capitalist system overthrowing feudalism, aligned itself with the Puritans and the Roundheads and the Muggletonians and the Ranters and the Quakers and all kinds of radical street preachers who didn't go along with the Church of England. And they rallied and they protested and they built an army and they defeated the King of England and they cut his head off in 1649. They cut the head of the King of England off. Oliver Cromwell led the English Civil War in which the King of England was beheaded. The English Civil War was quite wild. There was one of these religious dissenters was the Diggers. And they seized control of St. George's Hill. And they created an agricultural socialist commune in England. Very temporarily. And it was just a radical uprising. And at the time, information technology had really changed because this thing called the printing press. And there were thousands of pamphlets being distributed all over England as people were reading the Bible for themselves and reading pamphlets about politics and arguing about who should have the right to vote. It was an upsurge of democracy that these radical preachers, these English religious dissenters were part of. So after all of that was over, and after Oliver Cromwell died, they wanted to kind of cool things down in England. So what did they do? They brought the son of the king who had been beheaded, they brought him back, Charles II. He was fled to France. They brought him back and they put him on the throne. One of the first laws that Charles II made was that no religious dissenter could own a gun. No religious dissenter may own a gun. Why? He didn't want to get his head cut off, just like his father. Well, at that point, a lot of the English dissenters said, now they're taking away our guns. And that's because they don't want us to be able to defend ourselves when what comes next. And they started packing up and fleeing to the New World, to the United States. And when the American Revolution happened, we had the Constitution. Well, you'll notice that the first time the Constitution was proposed, the 13 colonies didn't accept it. They wouldn't ratify the Constitution unless it had 10 amendments to it, changes. And the first amendment was, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, meaning there will not be a church imposed on you, no church in England imposed on you. You have the right to be religious in your own way, and you will never have a state religion imposed on you. Or restricting free exercise thereof, meaning we will never repress your right to practice your religion as you choose. And then the second amendment was, you'll never take our guns away, and you'll never render us defenseless. Now, we fast forward to the time we're living in now, and we think about the moment that we're in now, where it seems like the question of the American Revolution, and a question that has hung over U.S. society, is once again back. Are we going to be an imperialist country, or are we going to be a country where working families come first? Are we going to embrace the English system, or are we going to embrace the American system? Or are we going to be a civilization of the sea, or a civilization of the land?